Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Red Path. This is episode 2 of the Delvarus is in the Details series, a series where I focus on really specific painting techniques and kind of hone in on them, spend a little bit more time talking about them, understanding how they happen, and showing you all how you can do it yourself. Before we dive in, let me just remind you, if you enjoyed the video, hit it with a like, and if you haven't already, maybe consider subscribing as well. You can also catch us on Instagram under the Red Path, where you can see more of these painting techniques and also some other updates of other videos we have coming. But yeah, let's dive in, and we're going to talk a little bit about the oils before we get started. So yeah, stay tuned, and let's go. Okay, so oil painting, and specifically oil washing. It's a subject that some people find very daunting to approach, but it's actually a lot simpler than a lot of people give it credit for. That being said, it's not a beginner's technique. So if you're not really that used to painting, if you're just getting started in the hobbying aspect, maybe wait a little bit before you try this because there's some not like advanced sort of techniques or moves or anything, but you need to be a little bit familiar with painting before you try this. That being said, it's definitely not an advanced technique at all. This is something that if you're an intermediate or sort of beginner to intermediate level painter, you can definitely do this. It's a really, really simple technique. Let me just emphasize that now. And if you've heard before that it's difficult or really hard to do, that's not really true, and you'll see as we dive into it that it's actually quite easy to get this really cool looking aesthetic on your models. So yeah, oil washing. What's it all about? Oil washes are an alternative, shall we say, to your normal acrylic washes. So the likes of Nuln Oil, Agrax Earthshade, all those really popular, I guess, paints where, the liquid skill that people call them. I would say that oil washes are liquid skill too. They they can do so much more for a little bit more effort than you would normally put into a regular wash. Now, the thing about oils is that they involve like different solvents and stuff, so you need to get a little bit familiar with those before you dive into it. Make sure that you take the right precautions if you're using these paints too. But yeah, it's a really fun technique, and it can bring an atmosphere to your models that you can't normally achieve necessarily from acrylic paints. You'll see what I mean by that as we dive into the video and you start to see the results as they come along. But yeah, it's really fun, really, really satisfying technique to do. And if you haven't already tried it, give it a go. I promise you, you'll probably love it. So yeah, grab yourself a brew and let's dive into the video. Okay, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at those oil washes, and I'm going to be using this Berserker as an example. So we've basically taken him to a certain point, like a checkpoint, where we have all the acrylic foundation layers done. We have some battle damage added to him, and we've given him a nice coat of satin varnish to protect those underlying layers before we start working with anything else. Now, he looks fine as it is, but we want to add some atmosphere to this model. We want to sort of place him in a setting. And to do that, we're going to be using an oil wash. So the key thing to remember with oil washes is that they add a sense of atmosphere to a model. And what I mean by that is this sort of berserker who doesn't really have a place in where he's fighting. He just looks like a berserker right now. But with the oil wash, we can set a theme for him, and generally speaking, you can achieve quite a Grimdark theme with oil washing. And that's why whenever you watch a tutorial for Grimdark painting or Blanchitsu painting, it generally involves using some sort of oils or enamels, because they can really add an element that you can't necessarily get with acrylic paints. But that's essentially what we're going to be working on. We're going to work through the oil wash steps. I'm going to explain them in a little bit more detail. So yeah, just to give you guys a bit of background of what exactly we're going to be working on today. So let's put this guy down for now, and we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of products that we're going to be using. Alrighty, so these are the oil paints that we're going to be using today. So we have Winsor & Newton's Lamp Black, and the burnt umber as well. Now, typically, these are two very popular oil paints that are used by the majority of people who get into oil washing and that kind of stuff. But you can kind of dive into any of the range. Like I said, the whole point of oil washing is to sort of apply a filter over a model. You know how with photos and stuff you can apply filters over them. The premise for oil washing is very, very similar. So depending on the color that you're using, that's the sort of filter that you're going to be applying. And when it comes to putting a model in the Grimdark, or just kind of getting that gritty atmospheric feel to them, a mix of black and brown is really, really popular. Equally in the past, when I'm working on certain skin tones and stuff, like for Slanesh demons, I've used a mix of black and blue for my oil washes, or for something like Khorne demons, you could use red and black as well. You really have to kind of consider what sort of a theme you're trying to lay down, and the atmosphere around it. But yeah, these are the two oil paints I'm using. So if you've never seen oil paints before, this is the sort of tube that they come in. They're pretty cheap to buy. I mean, I think it's maybe €2 or €3 for one of these tubes, and they will last you a very, very long time because you use very little of the paint when you're making up the wash. Um, so yeah, that's an idea behind the products, and sort of a little bit of information about them. But exactly how we're going to use them to make the wash, we're going to cover that next. Okay, so when it comes to oil washing, something that's important to kind of get your head around is solubility. So basically, that refers to, if you don't already know, sort of like certain things will dissolve in certain liquids differently compared to others. So to put that very simply, acrylic paint dissolves in water, which is why you generally thin down paint with water. But oil paint does not. It dissolves in spirits, so alcoholic based products. So for this, I'm going to be using Winsor & Newton's Artist White Spirit. I generally prefer this over kind of your standard white spirit because it's odorless. So, it's a little bit less kind of harmful and stuff. And that is an important thing when you're working with oils. Always wear gloves, wear a mask, and be in a well ventilated space. So yeah, basically we're going to be thinning our oil paint down with this white spirit to the point that it becomes a wash. So understanding that, certain paints interact differently with certain thinners is a really important part of kind of getting this technique laid down. And the better you understand it, the more you can kind of exploit it. So we're going to start making up this wash now. I'm going to show you guys what that looks like. Let's come back for that. Okay, so I'm taking a very small amount of the lamp black. You can see here it's pretty gloopy. This is all we're going to need really, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a little glass container. This one's real old and dirty. I've been using this for a long time to make my washes. We're just going to put the black into the bottom here and just leave it like that. And we're basically going to do the same for the brown. So as you can see, I'm using a really, really small amount of actual paint, just about this much. And that's actually going to do us for quite a large amount of wash, more than we would need for this Berserker alone. So I'm actually going to take a little bit more black just to make sure. The exact ratios of how much black and brown you use and that sort of thing doesn't really matter too much. I mean, the more brown you use, obviously, the more brown the wash is going to look. But I don't really have a set amount that I use, and I wouldn't presume to say you need a X amount in the bottom of the thing. Just whatever you're kind of feeling is right. So we're going to take our spirit now and just pour a little bit in. Again, the exact amount here is really up to yourself. I like to use about this much. And what we're going to do now is mix it all up. So the thing about the spirits is the more spirits you use, the more wash-like your wash is going to be, so the more diluted it gets. This can have varying properties on the actual model when it comes to painting it, but I generally like to have a somewhat thick wash, like a little bit thicker than a normal Games Workshop wash. But again, in certain circumstances, I will have a thinner wash, like when I'm doing big armor panels, because if you're doing big tank panels with a very thick wash, it can get real tiresome real fast. So just make sure that it mixes up nice and good. Got to be pretty aggressive. And usually for this, I use a really, really old beat up brush, and it like Literally, its only purpose is to mix oil washes. I generally kind of pick one of these brushes out when it's getting close to retirement time for one of them. They kind of get chosen to be victimized by the oil paint until they eventually burn out completely. And that is a really important thing when it comes to oil painting. Don't use your nice brushes because the solvents will really mess them up quite badly. It's better to stick with like synthetic brushes insofar as possible, or specific oil brushes. But yeah, we're just going to mix this up, make sure it's nice and consistent and all the paint is dissolved. Then we're going to come back. Okay, so we're coming back to the Berserker now, and basically to apply this wash, we're going to completely cover this model. So I'm going to take up some of this wash that I've made up on my brush. Now I'm using specific oil brushes for this, but you know, honestly, any kind of synthetic brush will do the trick. And we're going to really go pretty hard on this. So you can see we're really working over the whole model for this. I think it's a little bit too thin. So you know what, I'm going to thicken up this wash, and then we're going to come back and see kind of what it's looking like after that. Okay, so we're going to start applying the oil wash now. So I'm taking my oil wash brush, just a kind of old tough bristled brush that you can pick up anywhere. And we're basically going to work all over this model, giving it a crazy coat. You know, we're going to fully cover this guy in the oil wash. And it's going to look pretty weird. So if it's your first time using oils, don't be like freaked out by the fact that we're basically, you know, changing the entire aesthetic of this model, because when we come back in the next step for the cleanup, it's really going to kind of change everything again, and it's going to look a lot nicer than this, and we're going to have a lot of control with how, you know, we play with the wash and stuff like that. But for now, we're just going to cover this model with a real thick coat of the wash because we want to get them nice and atmospheric. So make sure, you know, you're getting into all those nooks and crannies. Work at it with a smaller brush if you have to as well. And basically, that's kind of this step. Like, you don't have to be very careful or anything. It's really easy to do. You know, if you're going for different effects, you can kind of pin wash and stuff, but for this guy, we're just going to go real heavy all over the model. So I'm going to cover this guy with the wash, and then we'll come back for the next step. Okay, so we finished covering this model in the wash, and you can see he's looking pretty weird right now. If you've never done oil washes before, you're probably freaking out at this point, but there's no need to worry. This model is going to look pretty cool after we clean them all up. So basically what we're going to do now is actually just leave this guy to dry. Now you can dry him with a hairdryer if you want, or you can leave him for maybe 4 or 5 hours to dry out. It takes a while for oils to cure, and that's kind of the nature of why they're so useful, because you can play with them for so long after you apply them. That's really why they're a favorite for washes. But yeah, we're probably just going to use a hairdryer, blast this guy for a couple of, maybe a minute or so, make sure the wash cures out kind of fast. And then we're going to come back and clean him up and make him look real cool. So let's tune in for that. Okay, everyone. So our wash is mostly cured out at this point. So we're going to start cleaning it off now. Basically, this is where we're going to start bringing the life back into the model, and where we really gain a lot of control in how dispersed we can make this wash, you know, the areas that it's hanging out. So we're taking a Q-tip here, and we have some of those Artist's White Spirits. We're going to soak the Q-tip in those. And then we're just going to come back on the model and very gently kind of dab across the areas that we've washed. And you can see the knee pad is really just coming back to life here. You know, we're taking off all that wash, while still we're going to leave some, you know, hanging out in the recess. You can kind of see it here where we're working on the greave as well. You know, it's really coming off nice and fast, bringing that old color back, but retaining that wash property that we had. So, you know, you can really, I suppose it's up to yourself at this point how much or how little of this wash you're taking off. Generally, I like to take a lot of it off. You know, if you leave too much of it on, you kind of create these like really stark shadows that don't necessarily always work. I prefer to kind of just keep some in the recesses or in areas where light would just not be present at all. Basically, what we're going to do is work over the whole model, take this wash off, and probably work at it a little bit in the harder to reach areas with an old brush. And once we do that, we're going to have a model that is similar to what we had before we applied the wash, but with a really interesting tint and basically all the panels and stuff kind of lined nicely with that black and brown kind of wash look. So it's going to create a nice atmospheric effect over this whole model. It'll really take him from what was a fairly ordinary looking world eater into the grimdark kind of realms. And I think that's kind of the key step here. Is this wash step is kind of you're controlling yourself how much you're taking off. It's really satisfying to do, really quite fun, and it's very easy. You just have to be really gentle with the Q-tip. If you go too hard, you can start to kind of work into the acrylic paint and stuff, and you don't really want to be doing that. So yeah, just kind of very light swiping motions is really the key. It's something that takes like a little bit of practice to getting used to, but once you do it a few times, it's very easy after that. So yeah, let's work over this model and come back and see what he's looking like then. Okay, everyone. So we've basically finished cleaning up the oils at this point, and you can see it's added quite a nice effect to the whole model. It's sort of an extra dimension, It brings out a lot of nice details, works in the recesses, and also, lends that atmosphere that I was talking about. It's really important if you're going to do any work after this, which I would recommend that you do, that you let the oil cure out fully before you start going in again. There's a couple of reasons for this. If you're to paint over oil while it's still drying, the acrylics, the surface tension basically messes with the acrylics, and it means that it can be very difficult. The paint will start to pool in certain areas, and it can just be really challenging. That being said, it's a great time to add blood effects because you can get some really interesting streaking effects going on that you can't normally achieve. Furthermore, if you were to start working with, say, other oils or enamels at this point, which I'm probably going to be doing next on this guy, you really need to wait for those, the first layer of oils to cure out because they'll remain active for quite a long time, usually about 48 hours. And if you try working your mineral spirits back in, you're going to end up reactivating the oils, and you can take away some parts that maybe you don't necessarily want to. All that being said, you can combine the enamel or other oil effects with the drying mineral spirits to get some fun kind of streaking effects going on and all that kind of a thing. But for the most part, it's usually best to let this cure out fully before you move on to the next step. So that's pretty much going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you found it interesting and I suppose educational. If you haven't messed with oils before, I definitely recommend it. But yeah, for now, let's close this one out and wrap it all up. Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed it, picked up some new techniques. Maybe if you're already a little bit familiar with the technique, you got a chance to refine it in this video, learned a little bit more information maybe. But yeah, I hope you found it fun. I hope it was something that you can see yourself doing now and practice as well. Honestly, can't stress enough. Really fun technique to do. Really simple once you get the hang of it. Practice a little bit on maybe some models that you have lying around, maybe some old models that, you could throw this wash on, see how it goes. Don't dive in straight away with Khorne the Betrayer or your Lord Discordant or anything. Try and get used to this before you really crack into it. But yeah, this was a really fun one for me, guys. I always love sharing these techniques, and it's probably one of the things that when people ask me about, how I paint certain parts of my models, they always ask me how I get this aesthetic. And really, oil washes are the key. They can, like I said, it's liquid skill too. So yeah, we're gonna have some more of these coming up, some more longer form videos, and a couple more things in the pipeline. So yeah, stay tuned for those. And until then, everyone, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill the Empire.